morning they let me go, I had a thermos of coffee in my left hand and a folder of quarterly projections in my right. 31 years of walking through that door, and I still showed up early. Still printed the reports nobody asked for anymore. Still believed that mattered. The receptionist didn't look at me when I passed her desk. I thought maybe she was busy. I told myself that. My name is Walter. No, wait. Let me start over, because that's not where the story really begins. My name is Edmund. I'm 58 years old, and for 31 years I ran the operational backbone of Hargrove Industrial Supply. Not as the face of the company, not as the guy whose name was on the letterhead, but as the person who made sure the trains ran on time. Inventory, logistics, vendor contracts that saved the company $11 million over a decade. The kind of work that doesn't make it into press releases, but absolutely makes it into bankruptcy filings when it stops getting done. I started there at 27. The founder, a man named George Hargrove, hired me out of a supply chain consulting firm in Cincinnati. He was 60 then, thick-handed, the kind of man who remembered the name of every delivery driver who ever brought product to his loading dock. He told me on my first day, "Edmund, I don't need someone who can talk about this business. I need someone who can feel it." I spent the next 3 decades feeling it. George's health started slipping about 4 years ago, quietly at first. He'd leave meetings early, delegate things he used to insist on handling himself. Then his daughter, who'd been living in Portland and running a boutique consulting practice, started appearing at board meetings. Then she started running them. Her name is Nora. She has a master's degree from Northwestern and the energy of someone who has never once doubted herself. That's not a criticism. That kind of confidence can move mountains. But it can also flatten them when it doesn't know the difference. By last spring, George had officially stepped back. Nora was named interim CEO. She brought in her own team, a COO she'd worked with at her consulting firm, a new VP of strategy, a head of innovation and transformation, who was 29 years old and had never worked in manufacturing. One by one, the people who had built this company started getting quiet phone calls from HR. I watched it happen. I told myself it wouldn't happen to me. Not after 31 years. Not after everything I'd carried. I was wrong about that too. The first sign was small. My parking space, the one I'd had for 15 years, closest to the side entrance, was reassigned. I was told it was a spatial reorganization. I parked in the back and said nothing. Then my weekly briefings with the executive team were moved to bi-weekly. Then monthly. Then I stopped getting the calendar invites altogether and had to ask to be included. The new COO, a man named Brett, early 40s, very good at using words like scalable and agile in the same sentence, started CCing himself on my vendor emails. Started asking my team for reports that used to come through me. Started sitting in on meetings I normally ran and offering opinions on processes he'd been aware of for 4 months. I said nothing. I adjusted. I told myself this was generational transition and that I just needed to demonstrate my value in new ways. I brought updated projections to a strategy session in February. I'd spent a weekend building out a 3-year supply chain optimization model, real data, real vendor quotes, realistic timelines. I thought it might actually reframe some of the decisions they were making that I knew were going to hurt us. Brett looked at it for maybe 45 seconds and said, "This is interesting, Edmund, but I think we're moving in a different direction strategically." Then he moved on. Nora didn't say anything. She didn't look at the report at all. I drove home that night and sat in my garage for 20 minutes before going inside. My wife, Karen, asked how the meeting went. I said, "Fine." She looked at me the way she does when she knows I'm not telling her the full version of something, and she didn't push, because she knows me well enough to know when I need time. We've been married 34 years. She has always known more about me than I know how to say out loud. The thing about George Hargrove was that he never forgot anything. He was technically retired, but he still came in on Tuesday mornings. He'd sit in the break room with a cup of terrible machine coffee and whoever happened to be around, and he'd talk About the old days, about vendors he'd known for decades, about decisions he was proud of, and ones he still second-guessed. About 8 months before everything happened, he asked me to stay late one evening after one of those Tuesday visits. His assistant had already left. The office was quiet in the way it only gets after 5 o'clock in winter, when the heating system hums and the parking lot empties out. He sat across from me at the conference table and didn't open with small talk, which was unusual for him. "Edmund," he said, "how long have you been here?" 30 years almost. 31 in March. He nodded slowly. "Do you know what this company actually is?" I said I thought I did. "It's the people who made it run," he said. "And most of them are leaving. Some already left." He paused. "I'm watching something I built get turned into something I don't recognize, and I'm not sure there's much I can do about it, but there are some things I can still do." I didn't know what he meant by that then. I didn't ask. I assumed it was the kind of thing older men say when they're grieving something they can't name. 3 weeks later, his personal attorney called my cell phone. I didn't tell Karen right away, not because I was keeping it from her. I tell Karen everything eventually, but because I needed to understand it myself first. What George had done was this. He had quietly, over the course of about 18 months, been restructuring the company's ownership through a series of trusts and transfers. Nora had received a substantial stake. That part was no surprise. But George had also carved out a portion, a significant one, and he had placed it, with full voting rights, in my name. 22% of Hargrove Industrial Supply, transferred to me through a family trust, effective the previous October, fully executed and filed. I sat in the attorney's office in downtown Columbus while he explained the mechanics, and I kept waiting to misunderstand something. But I didn't misunderstand it. George had watched what was happening to the company, had watched what was happening to the people who built it, and had decided to do something about it while he still could. "He wanted you to have standing," the attorney said. His words, standing. 31 years and a man who barely spoke about feelings had given me one word that contained all of them. I asked if Nora knew. The attorney said the transfer was legally filed, but that no individual notification had been made to other stakeholders beyond what was required by the operating agreement. She would find out eventually, through a formal disclosure, or through the company's annual ownership report filed in March. It was October when I signed. By March, a lot can change. I want to be honest about something. I didn't walk into the next 6 months with a plan. I wasn't playing chess. I was mostly just trying to get through each week without losing my sense of who I was, because that's what that kind of slow erosion does to you. It doesn't break you in one moment. It wears you down question by question. Am I being too sensitive? Am I just resistant to change? Maybe Brett's approach will work, and I'm just too old to see it. You start negotiating with yourself. You start apologizing for things you haven't done wrong. Karen noticed. She's a school principal. She deals with people in conflict all day, and she has a particular radar for when someone is being gaslit without knowing it. One night in January, she sat me down and said, "Edmund, you were the most competent person in that building, and they are making you feel like a burden, and I need you to stop letting them." I told her I didn't want to rock the boat. She said, "You don't have to rock the boat." She said, "You don't have to rock the boat. You just have to remember which one is yours." I thought about that a lot in the weeks that followed. The call from HR came on a Thursday afternoon in late February. I was at my desk working through a distribution contract renewal, the kind of contract that, if poorly negotiated, would cost the company somewhere between $400,000 and $700,000 over 3 years. I had the vendor on the line. I excused myself, told them I'd call back, and answered. The HR director's name is Stephen. He's in his mid-30s, pleasant in the way that people who deliver bad news professionally learn to be. He asked if I had a few minutes. I said I did. He told me that following a review of organizational structure and resource allocation, my position, Senior Director of Operations, was being eliminated as part of a strategic realignment. He said they appreciated my decades of service. He said there was a severance package. He said they'd like to do an in-person meeting the following morning to discuss transition details. I was quiet for a moment. Then I said, "Who made this decision?" He said it had come from the executive team. I asked if I should come in that evening or if tomorrow morning was preferred. He seemed slightly thrown by that. He said tomorrow morning was fine. He thanked me for my understanding. I hung up and sat for a while looking at the distribution contract on my screen. I thought about the vendor waiting for my call back. I thought about the $400,000 to $700,000. I thought about who was going to negotiate that now, whether it was Brett, who had never read a logistics contract in his life, or someone even newer who didn't know what questions to ask. Then I thought about what Karen said. I called the vendor back. I finished the contract negotiation. I got as favorable terms. I saved the company money it wouldn't even know I had saved. Then I drove home, and I told my wife what had happened. She made tea. She sat across from me at the kitchen table. She listened to all of it, and then she said, very quietly, "What are you going to do?" I told her I wasn't sure yet, but I told her about the 22%. The whole story, everything I'd held close for months. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "George knew." "Yeah," I said, "he knew." The in-person meeting was on a Friday morning. Nora ran it herself, which I hadn't expected. Stephen was there, and Brett, and the company's outside legal counsel, a woman I'd worked with on vendor disputes a few times over the years. She gave me a small nod when I came in. I don't know if she knew what she was walking into. Nora was polished about it. She thanked me for 31 years. She said the company was entering a new phase and needed a different organizational structure. She said my expertise was undeniable, but that the role itself was evolving beyond what the position had historically required. Brett said something about future-facing competency frameworks. I didn't write it down. Then Nora slid a document across the table. Severance agreement. It was reasonable, honestly, several months of pay, continuation of benefits, a non-disparagement clause. She said, "Edmund, I hope you understand this isn't personal." I looked at the agreement. I looked at her. I thought about 31 years of early mornings and weekends and phone calls at midnight when something broke. I thought about the contract I'd finished the evening before, after they'd already told me I was done. And I thought, she doesn't know. "I'd like some time to have my attorney review this," I said. Nora said that was fine, standard procedure. She seemed relieved the meeting was going smoothly. I shook hands with everyone. I thanked them. I walked out of that conference room with the kind of composure that only comes from knowing something nobody else in the room knows. I want to tell you exactly what happened next, but I also want to be clear about why I did it the way I did. I did not call an emergency meeting. I did not send a dramatic email. I did not call Nora directly and reveal what I held. I called my own attorney, a man I've known for 15 years. Smart and careful. I told him everything. He reviewed the ownership documents George's attorney had prepared and confirmed what I already knew. He said my standing as a 22% stakeholder gave me specific rights under the company's operating agreement, rights that included formal notification of material decisions affecting long-term company leadership and operations, and the right to request a meeting of shareholders and directors. He also looked at the severance agreement and pointed out that signing it before disclosing my ownership stake could create unnecessary complications. "Don't sign it," he said, "and request the Q1 shareholder meeting. It's March. You're entitled." The annual Q1 shareholder meeting was already scheduled for the second Tuesday of March, 8 days away. I did not sign the severance agreement. I did request the meeting formally in writing as a shareholder. Stephen from HR called me the next day, confused and slightly alarmed, asking if there had been a miscommunication. I told him there hadn't been. Nora's office called an hour later. Her assistant said Nora would like to speak with me personally. I told the assistant that I was happy to speak with Nora at the shareholder meeting, as I had formally requested it in my capacity as a company stakeholder. The line went quiet for a few seconds. Then the assistant said she would relay that message. I spent the 8 days between the termination meeting and the shareholder meeting the way I have always spent difficult stretches, working. I went through every operational file I'd been responsible for, organized documentation, wrote transition memos that I delivered to the relevant team members. I answered my work email until my access was quietly suspended, which happened on day 4. On day 5, Karen and I drove up to Lake Erie for a night. We hadn't done that in years. We walked along the water and didn't talk about work, and ate at a place we used to go to in our 30s. She ordered the Wally. I ordered it too, because she always picked right. On the drive back, she asked me if I was nervous. I told her a little. Not about the meeting itself, more about what came after, whatever it turned out to be. She said, "You didn't start this. You're just not pretending it didn't happen." That's the right framing. I want to be honest about that. I didn't engineer any of this. George gave me something. He made a choice, and he had reasons for it. I'll probably never fully understand, and I respected what he asked me to do with it. I wasn't looking for revenge. I was looking for something to mean something. The shareholder meeting was held in the main conference room on the 3rd floor, the same room I'd sat in for 31 years of quarterly reviews, vendor summits, and once, in 2009, a very long conversation about whether the company would survive the financial crisis. It survived, partly because of decisions made in that room, partly because I renegotiated 4 major supplier contracts in 1 calendar quarter and kept us liquid when liquidity was everything. I arrived 5 minutes early. The outside legal counsel was already there, 2 board members I recognized, Brett, Stephen, a few others. And then Nora walked in, and she looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen from her before, not dismissive, not polished. Something more careful. She hadn't said anything since my request. She'd had 8 days to learn what I was. The meeting was called to order, standard items first. Financial reports, operational summary, nothing unusual. I sat and listened and waited. When it came to business pertaining to organizational matters, which is where my attendance request had been formally listed, the outside counsel introduced the item. She said there was a matter of stakeholder standing to be addressed before proceeding with any discussion related to leadership transitions or severance arrangements. She stated plainly that Edmund held a 22% ownership stake in Hargrove Industrial Supply as transferred via the Hargrove Family Trust, effective the prior October, with full voting rights per the operating agreement. The room had the specific quality of silence that happens when people are computing something faster than they can react to it. Brett looked at Stephen. Stephen looked at his hands. One of the board members leaned back in his chair very slowly. Nora looked at me. I didn't look away. The severance agreement was not signed, the counsel continued, and is therefore not in effect. Mr. Crace's employment status is a matter that now requires shareholder-level consideration before any determination becomes final. She said a few more things about operating agreement provisions and shareholder notification requirements. I won't walk through all of it. Legal language isn't the story. The story is what happened in the room. After the counsel finished, there was a long pause, and then one of the board members, a man named Harris, who had been on the board since before Nora took over, looked directly at Nora and said, "Did you know about this?" Nora said she had not known the extent of the transfer. Harris said, "But you were aware transfer had occurred?" Another pause. Shorter this time. She said, "I was aware George had made provisions. I didn't know the scope." Harris made a sound that wasn't quite a word. I'm going to be honest about what I felt in that room. I want to, because I think people expect a moment like that to feel like triumph, like the scene in a movie where the music swells and everyone sees who you really are. And there was something like that. There was a part of me that had been quietly holding its breath for 31 years, and finally, in that room, exhaled. But mostly what I felt was tired. Not defeated tired, more like a runner who crosses a finish line and realizes the race took everything. You're glad you ran it, you're glad you finished, but your legs are shaking and you need to sit down. Harris asked me if I wanted to speak. I said yes. I told them I hadn't come to the meeting to be difficult. I told him I had spent 31 years trying to do right by this company and every person in it, and that everything I'd done since the termination meeting, the organized files, the transition memos, even finishing that distribution contract the night they let me go, was because I still cared what happened to this place. I said I wasn't there to make demands. I said I was there because George had given me standing, and standing meant something, and I wasn't willing to pretend it didn't. I told him that what I actually wanted was simple: for the company to make good decisions, for the operational knowledge that lived in this building to be preserved, not discarded, for the people who had built something real here to be treated like they'd built something real. And I said that if they wanted me to sign the severance agreement and walk away, I would consider it, but only if I was confident that the people and processes I'd spent 31 years protecting were going to be in good hands. That wasn't a threat. That was just what George had asked of me when he gave me what he gave me. Harris looked at the other board members. Nora was quiet. Brett left the room about 20 minutes into the discussion and didn't come back. I won't tell you every detail of what was negotiated over the next 3 weeks, partly because some of it is confidential and partly because it's not the most interesting part of the story. What I will tell you is this: the severance agreement was voided. A new arrangement was structured. I would remain as a part-time operational consultant for 18 months at a fair rate, specifically to oversee the transition of key vendor relationships and document institutional processes in a way that could actually be used. A formal onboarding process was implemented for new leadership, something that should have existed already. And the distribution contract I'd negotiated the night they fired me? It was executed. Saved the company $640,000 over 3 years. Stephen mentioned it at the next operational meeting, apparently without knowing I'd finished it after my termination call. I didn't correct him. Some things you just let land where they land. George passed away in April. Quietly, at home, which is how he wanted it. His family held a small service. I sat in the back and didn't speak because it wasn't my place, but I stayed until the end. Afterward, his daughter, Nora, came and found me in the parking lot. I expected something formal. She surprised me. She said, "He always talked about you, more than you probably know." I said I hadn't realized that. She said, "He trusted you with something that cost him something with his family. I need you to know I understand that now, even if I didn't then." She put out her hand. I shook it. "We're not friends. We may never be, but we understand each other now in a way that actually matters, which is more than most people get." Karen asked me recently if I regret any of it, any of the 31 years, the ways I sacrificed time with her, time with our kids, weekends and evenings and moments I can't get back. I told her I regret specific things. I wish I'd been at more of our son's baseball games. I wish I'd taken better care of my back. I wish I'd pushed back on certain decisions earlier and not talked myself out of it. But I don't regret the work. And I don't regret the work. And I don't regret what happened in that room. George gave me standing. I used it to tell the truth. That's about as clean as anything in 31 years of business ever gets. Karen said, "He picked the right person." I told her he had good instincts. She laughed. She's been laughing more since April. So have I. I still drive by the Hargrove building sometimes when I'm on that side of Columbus. I don't stop. I don't need to, but I look at the loading dock, the same one George pointed to on my first day, telling me to learn it before I learned anything else. And I think about what it means to build something that outlasts you, and what it costs, and who you trust to carry it forward. He trusted me. I hope I got it right. I've thought a lot about what George actually gave me, not the percentage, not the legal standing, the thing underneath all of that. What he gave me was a decision he'd already made about my character, before any of the hard moments arrived. He watched me for decades, not just the work but the way I did it, and he came to a conclusion about who I was when things got difficult. Then he put that conclusion in writing and filed it with an attorney. That's not luck. That's not something you can manufacture. You either spend your life being that person or you don't. And it turns out the ledger gets tallied whether you're watching it or not. I think about Nora too. I don't hold what she did against her the way maybe I once would have. She came into that company with real ambitions and real beliefs about what it needed, and she made decisions based on what she could see. What she couldn't see was 31 years of institutional knowledge walking out the door with a severance form. That's not cruelty. That's a particular kind of blindness that comes from never having had to build anything slowly. She learned something in that shareholder meeting. I believe she did. And the conversation she had with me in the parking lot after George's service, that cost her something. Offering that, I respected it. The thing I keep returning to is the night they called and told me I was done, and I went back to my desk and finished the distribution contract anyway. Nobody asked me to. My access was still active for a few more hours, and I used it to do the job I'd always done. At the time I told myself it was professional habit, but I think it was something else. I think it was the only answer I knew how to give to a question about who I was. Integrity isn't what you do when people are watching you. It's what you do at 7:30 on a Thursday evening after HR has already called, when nobody would notice or blame you for stopping. That's where the real accounting happens. Not in board meetings, not in shareholder votes, in the small private moments when you have every reason to quit and you don't, because you never actually did it for the recognition. Karen said George picked the right person. I think what she meant was that I had been that person long before George made his decision. The decision just made it visible. I'm not telling this story because the ending was satisfying, though it was. I'm telling it because the ending was the direct result of 31 years of smaller, quieter choices that nobody celebrated at the time. The night I stayed until midnight on a vendor crisis nobody else wanted to touch. The weekend I rebuilt a supply model that saved us through a rough quarter. The meetings where I told the truth when it would have been easier to agree and move on. Those things compound. They build something in you and around you that doesn't disappear just because someone hands you a termination form and thanks you for your service. What I know now, more clearly than I ever did, your life's work is always working for you, even when you can't see it. You build the thing, and then, if you've built it honestly, it holds.